Chapter 7. After the cruise, it got harder to see my God the same way, and easier to find fault with religion. The tide began to turn in a major way when I finally paid attention to the gruesome practices employed by major religions to spread their message, torturing and killing those who didn't conform. How had I missed this before? In England alone, people were burned at the stake depending on who was in power for being either Catholic or Protestant. Same God, different rules. Most were just following the religion they were raised in. But sorry, wrong side, into the bonfire you go. And let's not even get started on the Spanish Inquisition or similar practices in other religions. I thought about the sheer terror these practices must have caused, how parents must have been desperate to make their kids devout in whichever way would keep them safe. Loose lips and all that jazz, right? With my knack for annoying levels of why, I doubt I would have given religion much thought if I hadn't gone to Catholic school and it weren't introduced at the same time as Santa Claus, but with the added threat of eternal hellfire if I got it wrong. Still, maybe I was doomed from the start. I remember in grade school asking a nun where God came from. She tightened her lips and told me not to be impertinent. Perhaps writing about becoming an atheist is a sign I didn't outgrow that tendency? None of my religious instructors could ever give a satisfactory answer when I asked how we could know who's following the wrong God or the right God the wrong way. Every religion thinks they are the right one. Despite being raised Roman Catholic, a very large religion, the odds still don't seem good I'll end up in the good place since it wasn't even a thing during Jesus' lifetime. Eventually, the cruelty and ambiguity of religious messages and actions got to me. What kind of creator would maim and murder his few precious living creatures over misunderstanding rules he never shared? You might counter that with reference to the Ten Commandments, but to that I'll ask you if you've ever really read them. 6 out of 10 are about glorifying God in one way or another. There are 4 no-brainers, don't kill, steal, mess around, or get jealous, the last 2 seeming a little contradictory to me. All the rest are about you better recognize. I'll say it. I feel pretty certain a human wrote those words. I'll take the no-brainers, but I emphatically reject the rest. So, no religion. But hadn't I already parted ways with that? Apparently those Catholic threads ran very deep in my psyche. Would I ever really get them out? My disillusionment with religion fueled a reappraisal of its impact on my upbringing. Tales from my childhood would fill a memoir the length of War and Peace, but let's keep it brief. Life under my parents' roof was an earthly hell for us children and for them. But in Catholicism, marriage is a sacrament, and divorce is a mortal sin carrying the threat of eternal hellfire. So my parents stayed together, unwilling to face hell's flames, even to spare their kids. At least until it became too uncomfortable for them. Who exactly did their compliance serve? Surely not a God capable of creating plate tectonics and avocados. Certainly not me. Although I'm sure I made a number of mortgage payments for the counselors I needed to help me undo all the damage their marriage did to my psyche. Chapter 8. The gravis got worse over the next few years. I eventually couldn't walk more than a dozen steps without resting, and even developed a stutter. But no matter how low I felt, I couldn't find any reasonable path back to God. With nothing to fill the gaping hole where my faith had been, my mental and emotional state began to deteriorate. Looking back, I remember telling a few friends about my non-belief, hoping to revive the former ease of our relationships. They just looked concerned, offering up different belief systems as substitutes or advising I look at God as good orderly direction, like they suggest in recovery programs. Each time I'd end up feeling more alone, so I stopped trying. Despite my illness, I kept working and even completed an online graduate program in software engineering. As a reward, I splurged on a cruise to Antarctica. I figured I'd probably die from my symptoms in a few years, so why not go into a little debt? I got a mobility scooter that folded up like a Swiss Army knife, and with my husband, flew to Argentina, catching a boat to the bottom of the world. But the fatigue and weakness from the gravis turned my view of the earthly splendors to gray mush, and for 3 days I contemplated jumping overboard. Not having chosen to live in this body, time, place, or situation, I figured I should at least have the right to choose when I'd leave. My husband protests when I say this, afraid he'll end up on some court TV program, but I gave myself that right. On the third day, no longer able to take the feelings of utter hopelessness and despair at the loss of my God, my health, my pregnancy, and my life's meaning, I hit my knees and tried to pray. I reached up and begged for something, anything, to heal me, but felt nothing reaching back. I sat with the feeling of emptiness for a few minutes until I realized that by not praying, I'd been depriving myself of those rare moments where I would get quiet, open myself up, and let myself feel. Admitting that, I began to cry. One sob came up, then another and another, until I was a ball of anguish on the floor. I'd been needing to grieve all the while, to let out the pent-up feelings of loss my mind didn't even know how to put into words. I lay on the floor like that for hours, clenching and heaving until my body grew too tired to continue, then resting until another wave of untold sorrow would crest. At last the tears stopped and I dragged myself to bed, where my husband found me on his return from the casino. I'd been keeping my grief not only from myself, but from him as well. So, puffy-eyed and sniffling, I told him how I'd spent my afternoon. Then, because food is love in our house, we ordered some sushi. In the morning, we went to see penguins. Who can be sad when hanging out with penguins?